Imagine pouring nearly $8 billion of international aid into a single country.
Right, a massive sum.
Yeah, you're building schools, you're laying down roads, you're treating the whole situation like a textbook, classic decade of development.
Which is the standard playbook, usually.
Exactly. But now, imagine looking at the socioeconomic data a few years later and realizing that all that money, all that effort, didn't actually buy any progress.
In fact, it's worse than that.
Right. It somehow coincided with a half-century of societal regression. And so, today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that scenario.
It really is the ultimate paradox of international development. We're going to be unpacking a highly comprehensive, multidimensional academic evaluation report.
And this is looking at the socioeconomic data of Yemen.
Yes, from the year 2000 all the way through to 2023. And, I mean, what this data reveals is just a terrifying blueprint of multidimensional fragility.
Savvy stuff.
It is. It shows us how a state can absorb massive influxes of capital, but because that capital is, completely decoupled from national governance,
Right.
the country just becomes trapped in a vicious cycle of extreme vulnerability.
And the reason you, the listener, should stick with us for this deep dive is because, well, this isn't just a story about one nation.
No, not at all.
It's basically a masterclass in the cascading failures of human systems.
Okay.
But before we jump in, I do want to state something really clearly.
Good idea.
The data we are looking at maps exactly over periods of intense, devastating political and military conflict in Yemen, particularly around, 2015.
Right.
But our mission today is to examine this data strictly as impartial observers. We aren't here to assign political blame.
Exactly.
We aren't here to litigate the conflict, and we are absolutely not taking sides. Our goal is just to understand the raw, unvarnished human and economic realities contained in this source material.
We are essentially reading the vital signs of a patient in critical condition.
That's exactly it.
And setting that boundary is vital. The numbers themselves are entirely unbiased. They tell a story of intersecting failures that go far beyond any single political event or faction.
Yeah, the data just is what it is.
When you look at the raw metrics of survival, the data doesn't care about ideology. It only registers the presence or absence of resources.
So let's look at the baseline context right on the first page of the report.
Yeah.
Because they provide a visual that forces you to literally stop and reread the numbers just to make sure you didn't misunderstand the math.
It's a shocking graphic.
It really is. Imagine a map of Yemen, and right in the center is this staggering statistic. In 2010, the adjusted net national income per capita was roughly $1,725.
In constant 2015 dollars, yeah.
Right. And then by 2018, that figure had plummeted to around $968.
Which is a drop of nearly 44%.
44%.
To understand the gravity of that, we really have to strip away our normal economic vocabulary.
Like how we usually talk about recessions.
Exactly. I mean, when a healthy economy experiences a 2 or 3% drop, we call it a recession. When it drops by 10%, it's a severe depression. Right. A 44% collapse in income per capita is not a recession. It is the absolute vaporization of a nation's wealth. It means the structural engine of the economy simply turned off.
I want to really dig into that term for a second. Adjusted net national income. Because it sounds like abstract macroeconomic jargon, What does that actually measure?
It's actually a beautifully tragic metric for a situation exactly like this.
How so?
Well, normally people just look at GDP, right? Gross domestic product.
Sure.
But adjusted net national income takes that GDP and subtracts the depletion of natural resources, and it subtracts the depreciation of fixed capital.
Meaning it accounts for the wear and tear.
Exactly. It accounts for the wear and tear on your factories, your roads, your infrastructure, and the draining of your natural reserves like water and oil.
Oh, wow.
It's essentially what the country takes home at the end of the day after paying for all the damages.
Okay, so when that metric drops by 44%,
it tells you that the country isn't just failing to grow, it is actively consuming its own foundations just to exist.
Man. So to put that in perspective for you listening, imagine your household budget. Tomorrow, your family's income drops by 44% overnight.
Just gone.
Just gone. But your mortgage, your grocery bill, the cost of keeping the lights on, none of that drops. In fact, because of supply chain collapses, the prices of those basic goods actually skyrocket.
It's a total purchasing power meltdown.
Exactly. You aren't deciding whether to put off buying a new car. You are deciding which day of the week your family skips a meal.
And we have to remember the baseline we were starting from here.
Right, because Yemen wasn't exactly wealthy to begin with.
Exactly. In a highly developed nation, losing half your income might mean losing your home and moving into a cramped apartment. It's devastating, obviously, but you survive.
Yeah.
In a country where the baseline was already economically fragile, losing 44% of your income pushes you completely past the survival red line.
The survival red line. That's a chilling phrase.
You drop straight through subsistence and into outright destitution. The wealth accumulated over what the report calls the lost golden decade between 2000 and 2014 was just instantly consumed.
And the report gets incredibly granular on this timeline. It shows that Yemen's adjusted net national income actually hit a peak around 2013 and 2014.
They were building something.
Yeah, there was actual growth. But 2015 marked a catastrophic watershed. The growth rate went from a very slight contraction, I think it was negative 0.2% in 2014,
Correct.
to a disastrous crash of negative 22.7% in just 1 year, 2015.
That single year erased a generation of slow, painful economic accumulation. I mean, the total national wealth accumulation shrank from $50.5 billion down to $33 billion almost overnight.
The report also brings up another metric that I need you to translate for us, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It says gross national income, or GNI, per capita, using the Atlas method, fell from $12,250 in 2013 to $130 in 2021. And the annual growth rate hit a floor of negative 2.27% in 2015.
Right, the Atlas method.
Yeah, what is the Atlas method, and why does the report specifically use it here instead of regular numbers?
It's a crucial tool for looking at economies in crisis. When a country goes through massive turmoil, its currency usually hyperinflates or crashes violently.
Like we see in conflict zones all the time.
Exactly. So if you just measure their economy based on today's local exchange rate, the data looks like erratic noise. It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
The Atlas method uses a 3-year moving average of exchange rates, and it's adjusted for inflation relative to major global economies.
Oh, so it smooths it out.
Yes, it smooths out the wild currency fluctuations so we can see the real underlying purchasing power.
That makes sense.
So when the Atlas method shows a drop from $12,250 to $1,030, it's proving that this isn't just a temporary currency panic. The actual physical ability of a Yemeni citizen to buy a loaf of bread or a liter of fuel has fundamentally evaporated.
Wow. So the economic engine stops in 2015.
It's dead in the water.
And the immediate logical question is, why couldn't anyone restart it? I mean, countries suffer massive shocks all the time. Earthquakes, financial collapses, even civil wars.
Right. They eventually bounce back.
Exactly. Eventually, someone grabs the wheel, implements policy, and starts the rebuild. The data in this report suggests the reason that didn't happen lies in the complete systemic failure of governance.
Which brings us to some of the most chilling numbers in the entire evaluation. We are looking at the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI.
And what do those measure, specifically?
These are metrics published to assess how authority is exercised in a country. So everything from government effectiveness to the rule of law.
Okay, and the report highlights 2 specific WGI metrics. First is political stability and absence of violence.
Yes.
In the year 2000, Yemen's score was already a concerning negative 1.31. But by 2022, it had degraded to an abysmal negative 2.56.
To give you the mechanical context of that scale, because the numbers sound arbitrary.
Yeah, they really do.
The WGI generally runs from negative 2.5 to positive 2.5.
Wait, really?
Yes. Positive 2.5 is a perfectly stable, highly functioning utopia. Negative 2.5 is total anarchy.
Oh, wow.
So a score of negative 2.56 means Yemen is quite literally falling off the bottom edge of the globally recognized scale for political stability.
That's insane.
It is a statistical anomaly of chaos.
And the second metric is control of corruption. As of 2022, Yemen sits in the first percentile globally, out of 100.
The absolute bottom.
That means 99% of the nations on Earth have better control over corruption. I mean, I'm struggling to understand how a government hits the first percentile. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It looks like the complete privatization of public survival.
What do you mean by that?
When control of corruption drops to the first percentile, the state has lost its monopoly on order. It means there is no formal mechanism to enforce a contract, to regulate a market, or to distribute international aid without it being siphoned off.
Think about what that means for you, the listener, if you're trying to build a life there. Forget about large international investors. They flee immediately. Think about a local guy just trying to run a bakery. A negative 2.56 stability score combined with first percentile corruption, means you have zero guarantee your bakery, or even your street, will exist tomorrow.
You can't plan for next week, let alone next year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't sign a contract with a flour supplier because the courts don't function. You can't get a business loan because the banks have no security.
Right.
And if someone steals your delivery truck, you can't trust the police because, well, the police might be the ones who stole it to sell the parts.
Exactly. The entire invisible ecosystem of trust that allows human beings to trade and build is just gone.
It's completely shattered.
And it's a profoundly isolating experience for the population. You cannot execute macroeconomic policy. You can't lower interest rates or stimulate job growth when the fundamental wires connecting the government to the street have been cut.
So we've established that the economy is essentially in free fall and the governance structure that's supposed to catch it has completely dissolved.
Right.
That's a severe crisis. But when you look at the next layer of data, you realize we're transitioning from a crisis into a structural catastrophe. And that's because of the demographics.
The demographic data here operates as a massive multiplier of the existing fragility.
Yeah, it really makes everything worse.
We are looking at a rapidly growing, incredibly young population trying to survive in a shrinking economy.
And the numbers are staggering here, too. Children aged 0 to 14 consistently make up over 40% of the population.
It's a huge demographic bulge.
In 2023, it was exactly 41.1%. And because of this, the youth dependency ratio spiked to over 111%.
The dependency ratio is a vital concept here. It essentially measures the pressure on the productive part of the population.
Break that down for us.
So a ratio of 111% mathematically means that for every 100 working-age adults, there are 111 children who need to be fed, clothed, housed, and educated.
Wow.
Every single adult is carrying more than one dependent on their back.
Which normally, in a developing nation, is viewed as this massive potential asset, right?
Yes, the demographic dividend.
Right. This is exactly what fueled the massive economic booms in East Asia. You have this huge influx of young, energetic workers getting ready to enter the labor force, vastly outnumbering the elderly dependents, and they just turbocharge productivity.
But the demographic dividend requires a transmission mechanism.
Okay, what does that mean?
It requires an economy capable of absorbing that energy. It requires functioning schools to train them and thriving industries to actually hire them.
Which Yemen doesn't have.
Exactly. When those things exist, a huge youth population launches a country forward. When those things don't exist, you experience the dark mirror of the dividend. You hit the demographic trap.
I picture it like a car. You have this massive high-revving engine that's the huge youth population, but you have absolutely no transmission to connect the engine to the wheels.
That's a great analogy.
There's no jobs, there's no infrastructure, so instead of the car moving forward, the engine just overheats red lines and eventually catches fire.
That is exactly the mechanical failure happening here. Think about our earlier data point. The adults trying to support this massive youth population are doing so on an income that has been slashed by 44%.
Oh, right. The purchasing power is already gone.
The social burden is mathematically crushing. It guarantees that whatever meager resources a family manages to scrape together are spent entirely on immediate daily survival.
Food, water, maybe shelter.
Right. There is zero surplus capital left over for savings, for starting a business, or for education.
Which leads us perfectly and tragically into the realities of daily life for these kids. We have this massive youth population, over 40% of the country.
Yes.
If they aren't driving an economic dividend, what is actually happening to them day to day? Are they sitting in a classroom? Are they healthy?
The data paints a heartbreaking picture of a deprived future.
Let's look at the human capital crisis, starting with the schools. Because education is usually the way out, right?
The trajectory of primary education in this report is a story of a hard-won victory that was almost instantly erased.
The data shows that the male primary gross enrollment rate actually hit a peak of 90.7% back in 2005.
They were making real measurable progress.
Yeah, over 90% is great. But by 2016, that number severely collapsed. The proportion of out-of-school primary children surged dramatically after 2013.
It's a huge step backward.
Now, the Gender Parity Index, which measures the ratio of girls to boys in school, did improve slightly, from 0.55 to zero point 0.7.
But we have to look closely at the mechanics of why that ratio improved.
It's a bit of a statistical illusion, isn't it?
Very much so. An index of 0.7 still represents a deeply systemic bias against female education. I mean, for every 10 boys in school, there are only 7 girls.
Right.
But the reason the gap narrowed wasn't just a sudden, massive surge in female empowerment and enrollment. The gap narrowed largely because male enrollment plummeted so drastically.
I want to push back on that, or at least drill down into it. How does an economic collapse specifically target boys' enrollment in this data?
It's a fair question.
You would think, sociologically speaking, in a highly traditional society, boys would be the absolute last ones pulled out of school.
It comes down to the grim mechanics of an informal war economy.
Okay, walk me through that.
When the adult labor market collapses, when the factories close and the farms dry up and the family income drops by half, the household enters emergency survival mode.
Right. Everyone has to pitch in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In that environment, young boys are disproportionately yanked out of the classroom because their physical labor is suddenly required to keep the family alive.
Doing what exactly?
They are sent to scavenge for scrap metal, to haul water over long distances, to sell small goods on the street, or, in the worst-case scenarios, they are recruited into armed factions because militias offer a daily wage and a meal.
Oh, wow. So the classroom becomes a luxury they literally cannot afford.
Yes.
The future earning potential of an education is sacrificed for the immediate need of a bowl of rice today.
Precisely. The continuity of their education is shattered. And once a child is out of school for 2 or 3 years in a conflict zone, the statistical probability of them ever returning drops close to 0.
And they just age out of the system.
You are permanently scarring the human capital of the next 50 years.
And even for those kids who do manage to stay in a classroom, there is a biological barrier they are fighting against every single day.
The nutrition data.
Yeah, the nutrition data in this report is, I had to reread this part. It's just horrifying. The prevalence of anemia in children between 6 and 59 months, so from 6 months old to nearly 5 years old, is a staggering 79.5%.
It's a truly staggering number.
Wait, almost 80%.
Yeah.
Literally 8 out of 10 toddlers in the entire country.
Basically, yes.
Let me just process that. How does a society even function day to day when almost every single child is medically malnourished? And for women between 15 and 49 years old, it is 35.9%.
It's an epidemic.
What really stood out to me is that the report notes this metric hasn't seen any meaningful improvement in 20 years.
This is where we need to introduce a concept that experts call invisible hunger.
Invisible hunger. What does that mean?
When we hear hunger, we usually picture starvation, a complete lack of caloric intake.
Right, like famine.
But invisible hunger is a chronic systemic micronutrient deficiency. Anemia specifically is a lack of healthy red blood cells to carry adequate oxygen to your body's tissues, and it is heavily linked to severe iron deficiency.
So it's not just a kid with a hollow stomach, it's the blood itself lacking the basic biological materials to function.
Exactly. And the long-term effects of an 80% anemia rate in early childhood are devastating.
Because it affects their growth, right?
Yes, but this isn't just about kids feeling tired. Chronic anemia in the first 5 years of life permanently impairs cognitive development. It physically stunts brain growth.
Oh my God.
It reduces attention span, memory retention, and baseline learning capacity.
So, what does this all mean for the country's economic future if the kids' brains aren't developing?
It means Yemen isn't just losing its current economy. It is mathematically erasing the human capital reserve of its next generation.
That is so bleak.
Even if you miraculously solved the political crisis tomorrow, even if you signed a perfect peace treaty, eliminated all corruption, and built 10,000 state-of-the-art schools, you have an entire generation of children whose cognitive potential has been biologically capped by malnutrition.
You can't fix that with a policy paper.
No, you simply cannot build a modern, knowledge-based economy with a workforce that suffered mass neural underdevelopment in early childhood. It is a biological ceiling on GDP growth.
You are literally bleeding out your future economic output before these kids even learn how to read.
Exactly.
So if human capital is degrading at the root with the children, what is happening to the adults? If the kids are sick, how are the parents surviving?
It's a very precarious situation.
And what happens when the workforce inevitably gets injured or falls ill? Let's look at the health infrastructure and what the report calls the survival economy.
The data on healthcare infrastructure shows a system that hasn't just degraded, it has been nearly atomized.
The report states that hospital beds dropped to just 0.46 per 1,000 people.
Right.
Less than half a single bed for 1,000 people. And the physician ratio is even worse. It dropped to 0.09 doctors per 1,000 people.
Let's translate that into a microeconomic reality so we can really grasp it.
Right, I tried to visualize that. Imagine your local town, let's say a small town of about 11,000 people. Based on this data, you have exactly one doctor for the entire town.
One person.
One. If you have a heart attack, if a mother needs an emergency C-section, if a child gets a severe respiratory infection, there is one single physician who likely has no access to modern medicine, no reliable electricity for refrigeration, and no surgical supplies responsible for 11,000 of you.
Basic medical access effectively vanishes.
It is no wonder the report notes that despite some minor statistical fluctuations over the years, 53,000 children under the age of 5 still died in the year 2021 alone.
When the healthcare system hollows out to that degree, the labor force is operating without a net. A single injury can permanently remove an adult from the workforce and doom their entire family.
Because there's no disability insurance or sick leave?
Nothing. And what we see in the labor data is a frantic, disorganized retreat to whatever jobs can provide immediate daily cash to survive this reality.
The report shows a massive shift in employment sectors. Agricultural employment dropped from 60% of the workforce down to 31%.
A huge exodus from farming.
Yeah. Meanwhile, service sector employment jumped from 30% to 56%. And a metric called vulnerable employment sits stubbornly high at around 45%.
This is a critical data point to unpack because it looks deceptive at first glance.
How so?
Well, if you look at the economic history of developed nations like the US or the UK, a shift from agriculture to the service sector is usually a sign of progress. It's the standard post-industrial transition.
Right. Usually you go from the farm to the manufacturing factory, and then from the factory to the air-conditioned office building.
But that is absolutely not what is happening in Yemen. This shift is not a healthy economic evolution. It is a forced deindustrialization.
Okay, so what kind of services are we talking about?
People are fleeing agriculture, and we
Right.
will get into the terrifying physical reasons why they are fleeing very shortly, and they are being forced into low-end, highly unstable service jobs just to survive day to day.
So when the data says service sector, we aren't talking about people getting jobs in commercial banking or IT support or hospitality.
Okay.
We are talking about selling loose cigarettes on a street corner. We are talking about hauling jerrycans of water on a donkey. We are talking about standing on a corner hoping to be picked up for a few hours of manual day labor.
Which perfectly explains why the vulnerable employment metric is at 45%.
Right. Yeah.
Nearly half the country is working entirely outside the formal economy. They have no contracts, no workplace safety regulations, no health care, and absolutely no guarantee of tomorrow's wage. They are scavenging the ruins of their own domestic market.
So we've established that the healthcare system is gutted, the children are malnourished, and the adult workforce is trapped in a vulnerable survival economy.
It's a grim picture.
If you are a nation in this much trouble, you need an all-hands-on-deck approach to survive. Every ounce of human ingenuity is required.
Absolutely.
But the data reveals a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound. They are structurally locking half of their survival crew below deck. Let's talk about the gender barrier.
The data on gender exclusion is stark. It represents an insurmountable structural bottleneck for any potential national recovery.
Look at these numbers. As of 2023, the female labor force participation ratio is an abysmal 7.6%,
It's incredibly low.
meaning over 92% of women are completely excluded from the formal economy. Women hold exactly 0.0% of parliamentary seats, a statistic that has held flat since 2017, and 9.4% of women are married before the age of 15.
From a purely analytical macroeconomic standpoint, putting aside the profound human rights tragedy for a moment, this is a math problem that cannot be solved.
Because the numbers just don't add up.
You cannot rebuild a fractured, devastated society with only half your brain trust and half your workforce.
Right, because you need teachers, you need nurses, you need entrepreneurs.
Exactly. When a nation is in a state of total collapse, it requires the maximum mobilization of all available human resources.
Everyone has to contribute.
Yes. So when you exclude 92% of your female population from the formal labor force, and when women have absolutely zero voice in the legislative or recovery planning process, you are trying to bail out a sinking ship with one hand tied behind your back.
That's a great way to put it.
You are denying the economy, the innovation, the labor, and the leadership of half the population.
And the data on child marriage Nearly 1 in 10 girls married before they turn 15 ties directly back into the demographic trap we discussed earlier. It guarantees the cycle continues.
Let's trace the mechanics of that loop.
Yeah, please do.
A girl married at 14 is instantly pulled out of the education system, permanently removing her from the skilled labor pool.
Okay, so that's the first hit to the economy.
Right. And then she is highly likely to enter a cycle of high-risk early pregnancy, which directly increases that 111% youth dependency ratio we talked about.
Wow.
And because she lacks education and formal employment, she has no ability to invest in her own children's nutrition or schooling, leading right back to the 80% anemia rate.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is a self-reinforcing loop of poverty. The social structures that mandate this exclusion are actively preventing the macroeconomic recovery of the state.
Okay. We've looked at the collapsing economy, the total absence of governance, the demographic trap, the human capital deficit, and the gender exclusion.
It's a heavy stack.
That is an incredibly heavy stack of systemic failures.
Mm-hmm.
But here is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, terrifying.
We haven't even touched on the environment yet.
Exactly. Because everything we just talked about, politics, economics, social structures, those are human constructs. They can theoretically be changed by human behavior. But there is a hard physical limit to survival that Yemen is crashing into right now. And it doesn't care about politics. It's the environment.
This is perhaps the most existential threat outlined in the entire evaluation. We are talking about the absolute physical limits of the geography.
Listen to this data point on the water crisis. Renewable internal fresh water per capita fell from 371 cubic meters back in 1962 to an unthinkable 54 cubic meters in 2020.
To put that 54 cubic meters into perspective for you?
Please do, because I don't know what a cubic meter of water really looks like in terms of survival.
Right. So international organizations like the UN generally define the red line for extreme water scarcity at 1,000 cubic meters per person per year.
1,000 is the red line.
Yes. Yemen is at 54.
54. That is roughly 5% of the threshold for extreme scarcity. You are living on the absolute razor's edge of dehydration.
It's completely unsustainable.
And yet, the report states that over 90% of this incredibly scarce water is used for agriculture. Now, wait a minute. I have to push back here.
What?
We just discussed how agricultural employment is plummeting, dropping from 60% down to 31% of the workforce.
We did.
If people are fleeing the farms in droves, why is agriculture still sucking up 90% of the nation's vanishing water?
It's a brilliant question, and the answer lies in the tragic paradox of deep-water aquifer mining and cash crops.
Okay, unpack that.
A smaller workforce doesn't necessarily mean less water usage if the agricultural practices are deeply inefficient and driven by desperation.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How are they farming?
What is happening in Yemen is the rapid, unregulated depletion of ancient deep-water aquifers.
Yeah.
They are essentially mining fossil water.
Fossil water?
Yes. This is water trapped deep underground that took thousands, sometimes millions of years to accumulate. It does not replenish when it rains.
Wow. So once it's gone, it's gone.
Exactly. And they are pumping it out using diesel generators to flood irrigate crops. And a massive driver of this is the history of quat farming.
QAT.
Yes. Cat is a mildly narcotic chewing leaf that is a massive part of the cultural and informal economy in Yemen. It is a highly lucrative cash crop.
Ah, okay.
So as the formal economy collapses, farmers abandon traditional diverse rain-fed food crops like wheat or coffee, and they transition to growing crop because it guarantees a daily cash payout.
But cod takes a lot of water.
It is incredibly water-intensive. It requires constant, heavy irrigation.
So you have fewer people farming, but the ones who are left are drilling deeper and deeper, burning expensive diesel fuel to pump fossil water, just to grow a catch crop that doesn't even feed the population.
While guzzling the remaining groundwater until it's completely gone.
That's insane.
And because there is no governance, remember that first percentile for corruption and negative 2.56 for stability, there is no central authority to regulate well drilling.
Right. There's no water board to stop them.
Exactly. There is no one to mandate water conservation or drip irrigation. Anyone who can afford a diesel pump drills a well. It's the ultimate tragedy of the commons playing out at hyperspeed.
And what happens when that fossil water runs out? I mean, you can't print water. You can't ask the central bank to issue more rain.
When those aquifers are exhausted, it creates a hard stop for basic survival. It will trigger internal climate migrations that make the current political crisis look manageable.
Wow.
This extreme water depletion is an existential threat that fundamentally supersedes any military conflict the country is currently facing. If the land physically cannot sustain human biology, everything else is a moot point.
And the environmental data goes beyond just the water. The report notes that greenhouse gases have increased by nearly 80% since 1990, driven largely by agricultural and waste methane.
Which just adds to the climate
Yeah.
stress.
And their electricity transmission loss is over 20%.
That transmission loss metric is highly indicative of a failing state infrastructure.
Because it's just bleeding power.
Yes. It means that even when they manage to generate precious electricity, 1/5 of it simply vanishes into the ground because the grid is so degraded or it is siphoned off illegally. Every single system, water, power, human capital, is hemorrhaging resources.
Okay, let's take a breath. Given all these collapsing metrics, no water, an evaporated economy, empty schools, mass anemia, you would think the international community would step in.
And they did.
Right, the data shows they absolutely did. Which brings us to a really difficult question. Why didn't it work?
This is where the report forces us to confront the illusion of aid in a vacuum. It looks at the data on official development assistance, or ODA.
The numbers on international aid are massive. ODA peaked at roughly $7.9 billion in the late 2010s.
Oh, tremendous amount of money.
And the share of ODA relative to total capital formation in Yemen exploded. In 2011, aid made up 12.7% of total capital formation. By 2019, that number had rocketed to 59%.
This is a huge shift.
First, let's clarify that term for the listener. What exactly is capital formation in plain English?
Capital formation is essentially the bricks and mortar of an economy's future.
Right.
It's the money spent on creating tangible assets, buying tractors, building factories, paving roads, constructing hospitals. It is how an economy builds its capacity to produce more wealth tomorrow than it did today.
So if 59% of all capital formation is coming from foreign aid, it means the country isn't building its own house anymore.
Exactly.
Foreign entities are airdropping 60% of the bricks. The domestic engine hasn't just stalled, it has been entirely replaced by an external pump.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
I picture it like this: the leaky bucket versus the ventilator.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. So the original textbook goal of official development assistance is supposed to be pouring water into a bucket to help grow an economy. You inject $8 billion, it builds roads, it trains teachers, it creates jobs, and eventually the local economy takes over and you stop pouring.
That's the theory, yes.
But when the bucket is entirely rusted out, when the governing score is at the first percentile for corruption, it doesn't matter how many billions you pour in, it all leaks out.
Right.
So the aid stops being development water. It just becomes a medical ventilator. It's life support. It keeps the patient's chest rising and falling. But it's not curing the underlying disease. The patient is barely breathing.
And that analogy captures the tragic disconnect in the data. There was a massive injection of financial resources, but absolutely no governance capacity to absorb, direct, or sustain it.
The state was just too fragile.
Yes. When 59% of your capital formation is ODA, you aren't a functioning sovereign economy. You are a ward of the international community.
Wow.
Aid without a functioning, uncorrupted state apparatus invariably becomes a dependency trap. It warps local markets. Free food aid can actually bankrupt local farmers who can't compete with free.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
The money gets siphoned by corrupt actors to fund the very conflicts causing the crisis. And worst of all, it creates a scenario where local survival is entirely decoupled from local productivity.
Let's make that real for a second. If you're a local merchant, your daily survival isn't tied to what you produce or what you invent or what you sell to your neighbor.
No, it's not.
Your survival is tied entirely to whether the international aid trucks make it through the militia checkpoints that week.
Which means the entire population is suspended over a cliff by a string they do not control.
That's terrifying.
When the geopolitical winds change in Western capitals, or when global donor fatigue sets in and that aid decreases, the artificial floor drops out instantly, and the 44% drop in income we saw earlier becomes even more lethal.
So we have to synthesize all of this. We can't just view these data points in isolation anymore.
No, they are all connected.
They aren't separate chapters in a textbook. They are all happening at the exact same time, in the exact same place, to the exact same people. Let's look at the report's final synthesis, which maps out what they call the risk matrix and outlines potential paths for building resilience.
The report visualizes this crisis as a set of interlocking gears, and it's vital to see how they drive each other.
Let's review the gears. Gear A, is governance. A political stability score of -2.56 and corruption at the first percentile.
Gear B is the economy, a 44% collapse in income per capita.
Gear C is demographics and society. A 111% youth dependency ratio alongside an 80% child anemia rate.
And Gear D is nature, extreme water scarcity at 54 cubic meters per person.
So how do they interact?
What this matrix illustrates is the multiplier effect of vulnerability. You cannot look at a single metric and devise an isolated solution. The gears will crush it.
Right. If you're an international NGO or a foreign government, you can't just look at a spreadsheet and say, okay, Yemen lacks water. We're going to fund a $50 million water desalination and piping project.
It won't work.
Because you can't fix the water crisis if there is no local government to enforce well drilling regulations or protect the engineers. The local warlord will steal the pipes, the corrupt officials will skim the budget, and the local workers will be too sick from anemia to lay the concrete.
Single-issue solutions fundamentally fail in fragile states.
Precisely. You have to address the matrix simultaneously, which is why the report identifies 3 interconnected pillars required for any genuine long-term recovery.
Let's spend some real time walking through these because this is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, Pillar 1, political decoupling. What does that actually mean in the context of a collapsed state?
Political decoupling means establishing localized baselines of the rule of law and security that are somewhat insulated from the macro-political chaos.
Like community by community.
Yes. It acknowledges that you might not be able to solve the massive national-level civil war tomorrow, but you must establish secure, functioning microeconomies. Before you can activate any internal economy, people need a minimum guarantee of physical safety and contract enforcement. A local farmer needs to know that if he grows a crop, it won't be seized at a checkpoint.
Right.
A merchant needs to know his shop won't be expropriated by a militia. Without that localized security, no amount of economic incentive or international aid will work because the risk is simply too high.
So it's about building small, secure bubbles of governance from the ground up, rather than waiting for a grand national treaty from the top down.
Exactly.
Okay, Pillar 2, human capital investment. This goes right back to the invisible hunger and the empty schools.
Yes, and this is where the timeline is the most unforgiving. The absolute priority must be stopping the creation of a lost generation.
Because you can't get that time back.
Right. If you do not immediately address the 80% child anemia rate and the collapse in primary school enrollment, you are mathematically guaranteeing poverty for the next 50 years, regardless of what the politicians do.
It's locked in.
Nutritional interventions, providing iron, folic acid, and stable caloric baselines to toddlers, and basic educational continuity aren't just humanitarian charity. They are the single most critical long-term macroeconomic investments you can make.
That makes perfect sense.
If the brain trust of the 2040s is cognitively stunted today, there is no economic future, period.
And finally, Pillar 3, the water-energy-food nexus.
This is addressing the hard physical limits of the environment we discussed.
The 54 cubic meters of water.
Exactly. You cannot solve food security without solving water, and you cannot solve water without energy. It means pushing aggressively for highly efficient, sustainable irrigation, like drip irrigation, and replacing those diesel water pumps with decentralized renewable energy like solar grids.
Get off the diesel.
Yes. You have to break the dependency on imported diesel, and you absolutely have to stop the suicidal mining of non-renewable fossil aquifers. If they don't solve the water-energy nexus, the geography will literally become uninhabitable, and all the political stability in the world won't matter.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We've journeyed through more than 2 decades of incredibly dense, multidimensional data. We've seen a nation's wealth vaporized by 44%.
We have.
We've seen a governance structure fall off the map. We've seen schools empty out, ancient water aquifers dry up, and 80% of an entire generation's children biologically capped by invisible hunger. And we've seen how billions in international aid warped into a permanent leaky ventilator.
It is a lot to take in.
It is a brutal, sobering reality check on how incredibly fragile the very concept of development truly is. We take the upward swing of progress for granted.
We really do.
We assume that recessions end and things get better. But the data shows that when the underlying gears of a society governance, human capital, and the physical environment shatter simultaneously, there is no automatic bounce back. Gravity doesn't pull you up, it just pulls you deeper into the void. The floor can always fall further.
It challenges our most deeply held assumptions about global progress and how we help one another. And I think there is a lingering question here that the data implies but doesn't directly answer, something we all need to deeply mull over.
What's that?
If injecting $8 billion of financial aid cannot save a nation whose baseline governance and environmental ecosystems have totally collapsed, how should the global community fundamentally rethink its approach to intervention in the 21st century?
That's a huge question.
Are we just perpetually funding the symptoms while completely ignoring the underlying disease?
That is the thought we will leave you with. When the X-ray shows the entire skeletal structure of a nation is missing, handing them a Band-Aid isn't going to fix the break. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the data with us. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will catch you on the next one.